Assalamu alaikum. Let's begin with our second lesson discussing position vectors, and today we're just going to go over a real life example to illustrate how position vectors are used. Let's just draw our coordinate axes, right? Very important, the first step, right? X and Y, the X and Y axes, right? And we define an origin right over here. This is our origin, the O, right? Let's say a lighthouse was situated at our origin in this frame of reference, right? And a survivor, a stranded survivor or a man was stranded at point A in the middle of the sea. Now, the people at the lighthouse obviously noticed that, right? And what they need to do is kind of tell a rescue boat how to get to point A. Now, this would be very easy if the rescue boat was situated at point O. So they know they can measure this position vector, right? And just tell the rescue boat to follow this position vector, you'd get to point A. But what if let's say the rescue boat was out on some routine run and it was located at this point B. Now the rescue boat would need to know, sorry, let me draw it a bit straighter, this vector, which is BA, right? The rescue boat would need to know this vector BA, but the lighthouse only seems to know this vector OA and this vector OB. So now that's a problem. The rescue boat needs to be told the vector BA. So we can essentially, using the information given OB and OA, we can calculate BA. Let's first of all define OB. OB, let's give it a numerical value. OB is just, let's say, to get OB is the path taken, is the vector used to describe how to get to point B from point A. It's the position vector of B relative to O. And let's say it takes 2 steps in the X direction and let's say, I don't know, 4 steps in the Y direction. And we define OA similarly. Let's say 6 steps in the X direction and 2 steps in the Y direction, right? So we have our vectors OB and OA. Now, how do we get BA? Okay, now BA in and of itself just tells you that if you were at B, how many steps in the X direction and how many steps in the Y direction independently you would have to move to get to point A, right? So BA, the vector BA does not represent the coordinates of point A. Okay, but let's say you were now, if you were at point O, now you take these independent steps in the X direction, 2 steps in the X direction, 4 steps in the Y direction to get to point B, right? Now you're at point B. Now, if you were to take, let's say, some number of steps in the X direction and some number of steps in the Y direction that is given by BA, right? You would end up getting to point A. But what if you added this information to the previous steps that you took, right? Let's say to get from B to A, you moved X steps in the X direction and Y steps in the Y direction, right? So what if you were to add these to the initial amount of steps you took, 2 plus X and 4 plus Y, right? Now, can you see these and these kind of make up a way for you to see now if you were to take X steps in this direction from B to A in the x direction, and 2 steps from O to B in the x direction to get to B, and add these up, you would get basically these many steps, which are essentially the number of steps you take from O to get to A in the x direction. Similarly, if you were to add your initial steps in the y direction to get to B, which is 4, right? 4 steps, and then you were to add the additional number of steps you get take in the y direction to get from B to A, you would get kind of like adding this up. Well, since you move upwards and then move kind of downwards, adding this up would essentially, make a subtraction, and you would essentially get these number of steps. Sorry, let me just get a nice new color, a red color, and you would essentially end up getting this many steps, which is just the number of steps in the y direction taken to get from O to A, right? So this would essentially end up giving you the position vector of OA, and the position vector of OA is also, remember we talked about it in the previous video, it's also it can also represent the coordinates of the point A, right? So what I want to tell you was that if now this vector that you have BA just tells you how to get from point B to point A, right? It doesn't give you any solid coordinates of any points. But if you were to add this vector to, well, let's say the initial point that you were moving from, which is coordinates of B, right? So you're moving from B to A. So if you were to add these, add this vector to the coordinates of the initial point, which is B, that you were moving from, you would get the coordinates of the final point, which is A, right? So you would get the coordinates of the final point, which are just represented by OA. So a vector equation can be formed like this. Let me write in a new color. BA plus let's say OB, right? BA plus OB equals OA, right? And since BA is unknown, we can move it around. OA minus OB, and we can easily calculate BA like this. Make it a bit smaller. 6.2 minus 2.4, 4 and minus 2. That's what BA is. 4 and minus 2, right? So to get from B to A, right, to get from B to A like this, you would need to move 4 steps in the x direction and negative 2 steps in the y direction, which means just move downwards in the y direction. Okay, positive means upwards, negative means downwards in the y direction. So now this 4 and minus 2, they do not represent any coordinates, right? They just represent how many steps you have to move from B to get to A. But if you were to add this to the coordinates of B, that is the initial point that you're starting off from, right? The initial point that you're essentially the vector BA is telling you how to get from one initial point to a final point. The initial point is B. If you were to add this vector to the initial point's coordinates, which is 2.4, it would lead you to the final point, the coordinates of the final point that the final point that this vector BA is taking you to. It would give you the coordinates of that final point that this vector BA is taking you to. So this would give 6 and 2, which is just the position vector of OA, or the coordinates of OA, right? So that's how using a bit of vector algebra, you calculate BA, which is 4 minus 2. Now the rescue boat knows how to get from point B to point A using just the initial information that the lighthouse had. And by this method, you can essentially calculate the position of any point relative to any other point if both of those points' position vectors are known relative to one same point. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me here, and I hope you understand. If you have any questions, please do leave it in the comments below. Please, I would love your feedback. If you were to share it with me regarding my teaching style, please share this with your friends. Please subscribe. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.